Welcome to the October NICCast. I'm proud to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Wendy M. Smith, the director of something or other at the university, the Math, Science, and Computer Education. Did I get that close? CSMC.
Yes.
Right? At the University of Nebraska, and one of the co-directors, well, the co-director with me of the Math Teacher Education Partnership, and you'll notice our bright new logo. We're very excited. No more green. And so she'll be talking about some of the results from the Seminole project, on which she's been a PI for a while. Is that good enough, Wendy, or should I
that's
add,
good enough.
Should I add a few personal interest stories?
We can just get going because I've got
Okay.
lots planned.
All right, let's do it.
All right. Thanks, everyone. So the Seminole project, Seminole stands for Student Engagement in Mathematics through an Institutional Network for Active Learning. And the Seminole project actually grew out of the Math Teacher Education Partnership and then has kind of been working in parallel to it. So back in the earlier days of the Math Teacher Education Partnership, around 2013, when we got some funding from the Helmsley Charitable Trust, that trust specifically wanted to give some money to active learning. And we had 5 math departments at that point who worked on this and got some of the grant funds. And we noticed that there were really interesting differences in how implementation grew or didn't grow. And then that developed into a 5-year IUSE project that had a no-cost extension. So from 2016 through 2022, the Seminole project looked at how do you change math departments' cultures toward active learning. Okay, I said all that, and then I remembered we have all these other nice slides. So other nice slides. So as we're working a whole group, please keep yourself muted. But when we are working in small groups and having time for conversation, feel free to unmute yourself and talk. We invite you to rename yourself to include your pronouns and institution. I use she and they pronouns. While we're doing the whole group, feel free to leave your camera off, especially since I've got my slides being shared. You can raise your hand physically or actually use the reactions on Zoom to call attention, and also the chat box. I've got the chat box open on my other screen. And we'll have some times very soon that we'll ask you to type some things in the chat. Overall, for MTEP, what is the NICCast? It's a monthly webinar or interactive meeting of our networked improvement community so we can share ideas, lessons learned, and build the community. Definitely, and it's different from something more like a colloquium talk because there will be times for interaction. Overall, the NICCast is to try to build familiarity with the process of a networked improvement community and the research process, to support all the program NICs and build a community and a shared vision. And today we're talking specifically about math courses, since all of our future secondary math teachers need to take some math courses. And one aspect of that is how are these courses being taught to actively engage students? So specifically, we're going to look at the change levers from Seminole, consider the role of policies in change efforts, consider how a systems thinking approach is useful for the policies and change and how this fits into the goals of the Math Teacher Education Partnership, and discussing how to do this. Sometimes they do science experiments and say, don't try this at home, but this is all about please try this at home and try this with your math department. So just really briefly, with Seminole, some of what was underlying this. So 95% of students who are taking any college math classes are taking calculus 2 and below. This is over 3 million students. Within a math department, and thinking about secondary math teachers, there are plenty of classes over calculus, but overall in the country, students are largely at and below Calc 2. And so the Seminole project specifically focused on math at that level. And in these courses at Calc 2 and below, across the country, the average failure rate, so grades of D, grades of F, and withdrawing, tends to be about 75%, or in other words, 25% DFW rates means about 75% of students are getting a C or higher in these courses. This is at Research 1 institutions, but when you look at other institutions, the numbers are often similar or worse, sometimes closer to 50%, sometimes 70% failing, not good. Failing math correlates very highly with freshman dropouts. And after the first year, students tend to switch away from STEM majors. And sadly, from kindergarten onwards, beliefs about math and attitudes toward math have a pretty monotonic decreasing trajectory. So this is collectively the problem. And we know a lot about how people learn. I feel like with this audience, I'm not going to belabor this point, but from reading and observing and listening to discussing, doing, teaching others, and especially talking to math departments, the question is, how does this align with how we teach? And when we have a department that largely bases teaching math around lecture, we know better now. And so the question is, how do we make it so that we are doing better now that we know better? So most of this focus is on active learning, but when I'm saying this phrase, I know that active learning means a lot of things to a lot of different people. So I want you to take a moment, and in the chat, I want you to put some words that come to mind with active learning. I'm not looking for the entire definition, but just some words and phrases. What is active learning? You can feel free to think about what is active learning from teachers' perspectives, students' perspectives. Oh, now I see some stuff in the chat. Yeah, thinking, doing, talking, mathematical inquiry, students inventing math, students producing the thinking and the ideas, engaging students in meaningful problems, student discussions. Yep, definitely all of that. All right, if you have other ideas, you can feel free to keep dropping them in the chat. The Seminole Project took as their definition the one from Larson and Rasmussen's 2019 research commentary. Now, you might notice I just said 2019 and Seminole started in 2016, but Chris Rasmussen, who wrote this 2019 paper, is also one of the co-PIs of Seminole, so we kind of had early access to thinking about what this definition could be. And so when we were thinking about active learning, we're talking about teaching methods and classroom norms that promote students' deep engagement in mathematical reasoning, peer-to-peer interaction, instructor interest in and use of student thinking. So not just a straight lecture, but actually taking what is happening and using that to dynamically make decisions about what to do next. And instructors' attention to equitable and inclusive practices. Yeah, and I see over in the chat, yeah, students being engaged with this hands-on, minds-on, does not have to involve walking, but it could. And then further, just having learning be active does not automatically make it be equitable. So thinking about how we center equitable and inclusive teaching practices, we know a lot that student belonging is critical to having positive outcomes, especially in STEM fields. There are lots of different things that can help a student feel more like they belong in STEM or math, and that they feel less like they belong in STEM or math. And people come into college with different kind of convictions of how much they feel they belong and how much it takes to make them feel like they don't belong to the point that they'll quit and or quit being a math major or something. And part of Seminole had a year-long professional development program for instructors that focused a lot on microaggressions and how to, not just microaggressions, but how to help students feel like they belong. And microaggressions was one of the things we focused on because students experiencing a lot of microaggressions, that tends to correlate with lower feelings of belongingness. But overall with Seminole, we really think of this as a systems approach. When we have an n-dimensional problem and our n is greater than 2, you cannot solve this with a 1 or 2 dimensional solution. So this should seem very familiar and related to MTEP in that we need a systemic approach. We have to figure out the system that created and perpetuates the current problems. We need a cultural change to shift away from lecture as the norm. And a cultural change is about the people involved, the power dynamics among them, the structures of things like course coordination or how students get advised, and beliefs, people's individual beliefs, but also the collective beliefs. Is it valued in this department to improve teaching and spend time doing that? So what we know about effective change processes, and this should, again, look very familiar for MTEP, is that we have a common goal. We figure out what's happening with the system. plan strategies and measures, do the actual plan, measure the impact, and decide the next steps. The Seminole project didn't explicitly take on the PDSA, Plan, Do, Study Act, but hopefully you can see PDSA is in this effective change process. This is, I think, just another way to delineate it, but it's essentially Plan, Do, Study, Act. And then we had assumptions that we needed to have a common vision of success, and it needed to be more than just student grades, involving all the relevant collaborators, not just math instructors. Change is complex. We need change agents who will push the change and be passionate to try to make things happen. And that with all this, we can't forget the mathematics. Some of you, I think, are in mathematics departments. For those of you who aren't, one of the things in Seminole that was key was emphasizing to the mathematicians involved that we're not forgetting the math. Math is still important. And with all of this, centering equity, keeping equity at the center of all the decisions, all the ways we filter and understand what's happening, the ways we measure things. So this is just a few details about Seminole. I already mentioned the years. The collaborative institutions were APLU, University of Colorado Boulder, University of Nebraska Lincoln, and San Diego State. We had 3 different phases of different kinds of cases of departments that had already changed, and then departments that were trying to change. We were trying to figure out how to help departments change their culture, and then how to help, people like you change math departments. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but we collected a lot of data. We had self-study data, we had survey data, local data about grades, course taking trajectories, placement, retention. We did some observation, and then we interviewed lots and lots and lots of people, from students to provosts, everything in between, on a lot of different campuses. And then this is a very, very oversimplified picture of the system, where we think about students, instructors, classrooms, departments, institutions, but the institutions are in communities. And then the departments, a connection to other departments, especially with mathematics. You can't just start changing math courses without talking to the other majors that take these math courses, especially engineering and a lot of the sciences. Okay, I've got like 2 more minutes to talk, and then we're gonna start having conversations. So in Seminole, when we finished phase 1, this was institutions that had sustained changes to their math departments for at least 3 years. And what are some of the features that we saw? We saw them having an institutional and community identity of, we are good at teaching, we value teaching improvement. The campus culture respected teaching. There were paths to promotion based on strength of teaching. There were effective leaders who were very opportunistic, found ways to get the resources they needed, found ways to connect what they were doing to the university priorities, which then got resources. But there's this willingness to understand that there is a cost to improved instruction. It's not just a zero cost thing. Coordination of multi-section courses, it was a really big deal, especially when we think about issues of equity. If you haven't worked with the math department to look at data, it's pretty common to look and say, oh, look, 80% of people are passing in the 9:30 in the morning section, but only 50% are passing in the 10:30 section. And it doesn't seem fair that just, the luck of the draw of which one fit in your schedule better would then, dictate how well somebody has a chance to do in the course. There was enough support for enacting new pedagogies to move beyond lecture. There was flexibility, because not everything you try the first time turns out to be what you go with. That's part of the cycles of Plan, Do, Study, Act. And so having that flexibility to not just commit to something and then never be willing to deviate. And then a plan for succession, knowing that you don't have the same instructors teaching the same courses every single semester. You don't have the same department chair for 20 years for the most part. So actually planning for that explicitly. When we shifted to the departments that were trying to make changes, but were starting off with having largely lecture, we saw them doing things like initiating or expanding course coordination, going beyond a common syllabus and textbook, although some of them needed to start there, but then going beyond that to things like common assessments and common grading of common assessments. We saw them working explicitly on hiring course coordinators, hiring undergraduate learning assistants or supplemental instructors, hiring instructors, and having having questions about somebody's teaching philosophy be part of the hiring process. Instructor professional development, both initial and ongoing, to support the changes. It's not good enough to just tell someone you need to stop lecturing and then expect them to be able to do something different. We saw people collecting local data, paying attention to local data and course placement. We saw them working on active learning tasks and materials. You can do active learning with like your Swarkowski, calculus book or Thompson calculus, but there are also a lot of materials out there that have paid a lot of attention to making group-worthy tasks that can support active learning more easily. We saw people focus on culturally responsive teaching and being able to connect calculus to issues of social justice and pre-calculus. We saw them planning for sustainability and thinking, what can we do beyond the Indo grant funds, beyond the current people who are leading this? We saw them recruiting strategic members who had kind of the power in order to make changes. And we saw them connecting within networks to be able to give them more power to what they were doing. So what we are going to do now is we are going to split into some groups to have some conversations about these different change levers. And so in the chat, Deb has just dropped a link to these slides. You can feel free to open them if you want, but you don't need to. But as we split into groups, we're going to open some groups and let you put yourself into a group about what you want to talk about. So these are kind of the major change levers about using data, leadership, active learning, instructional materials, course coordination, professional development, community of practice of instructors, undergraduate learning assistants, and the learning environment, which is things like the physical environment, like having chairs and tables that move or having enough whiteboards, that kind of thing. So we're going to have you talk to each other about a change lever of your choice, and then we'll kind of come back to the whole group. And with how much time we have, I think we'll get to do this for 2 rounds. So you'll have a chance to talk about 2 of the change levers, or if you really care mostly about one, you can just pick the same one twice. So we're going to open just 4 rooms for right now and have you shift into the breakout rooms. So pick the one you want to talk about. And things you can be talking about would be thinking about, what does this look like at your institution? How are you hoping that you could use this change lever to make changes? Maybe some of the barriers you think you might encounter or ways that you think you might be able to get around those barriers. All right, so Deb, why don't you go ahead and open the rooms? So specifically, we're having you pick to talk about leadership, resources, professional development, or course coordination at this point in time. If you need help moving into one of the breakout rooms, just put in the chat which room you want to go to, and I think I can move you to a room if that would be helpful. Yeah, so with the ongoing professional development, some of the ways of doing kind of a course coordination meeting, that yes, you have to hit the nuts and bolts of things of like, how do you actually get grades to go in Canvas or Blackboard or D2L? But then there's also the conversations about, oh, hey, we're teaching this trig class and we're getting up to the section on trig identities. Like, how do we put this in context, or what are ways to help students understand why we're even doing this, or should we be doing? Well, that's a different conversation, but, or things like the chain rule, you're getting up to where you're going to do the chain rule. What are some what are the kind of different examples you want to make sure you include that so that students can see some different ways that the chain rule would apply. And so having some of the pedagogical conversations about what kind of questions you want to ask students, what kinds of examples do you want to do, how do you want to assess what students know, and that's a way to get some of that ongoing professional development. So earlier I'd had Deb drop the link to the slides. So there are slides in here that kind of have specifically what Seminole found about these things, but for this NICCast, I want us to focus more on having conversations and not just listening. It's going to make me go through all these because I didn't scroll the right place. Wrong way. There we go. So what we're going to do now is put you in some random breakout groups to have some conversations about this, or you can also go back to any of the other topics here. But thinking about when you think about your context, the context of your system related to pre-service teacher outcomes in mathematics courses, what are kind of the most dominant aspects? Could be dominant problems or dominant like change levers or like resources you have. What are some of the campus policies or norms you have around educational innovation in the mathematics courses? And how might you use change levers to try to make progress toward improvement goals that you have as part of your networked improvement community? So these are the questions we want to have you ponder. So like I said, this time we're going to just put you in some random groups to talk about this or anything else about the math courses and your work in preparing mathematics teachers. So we'll do that for about another 10 minutes. All right, so Deb, do you want to go ahead and open some random? People are back. Thank you for getting the recording back again. So hopefully you had some interesting conversations around these discussion questions or whatever else you were going to talk about. I wanted to just mention a couple resources that are available. So Seminole does have a book. It looks like this, Transformational Change Efforts. It was published by the American Mathematical Society and the Conference Board on Mathematical Sciences. There's also a special issue of Primus. And when I say special issue, we had such an overwhelming response that they actually let us have 26 different articles across 3 issues. So those are all available on Primus. And for the most part, I think a lot of institutions have access to that. And some of these I think are put as open source, so you can get a bunch of them. But these collectively tell a lot of stories based on the data about how departments changed. Especially the Primus issue, the focus of the stories is math departments kind of at the beginning of change, like what are the first steps? The Seminole book is focused on the departments that had sustained changes, and that's good, but it also kind of compresses some of those early steps of how things really got started and got spread beyond the first couple enthusiastic people. So the Primus special issue really kind of unpacks how do you really get things started and get it to spread beyond, the 1 or 2 people who think this is a great idea. There's also a lot of resources out there through the Accelerating Systemic Change Networks. They have an entire website. They have this book called Transforming Institutions that's free. There's a change dashboard, which with MTEP, since we've got the PDSA cycles already going, the change dashboard probably isn't as helpful. But it's a different form of doing pretty much the same kind of thing. And sometimes a different form is like what it takes to get some reluctant people, like maybe PDSA cycles is intimidating to people, but oh, maybe we could try this dashboard. But it is still kind of that same cyclical process. This resource on the left about increasing student success in STEM, we've used this for a number of years as an MTEP resource that also works, I think, with focusing on mathematics departments. And Teaching for Prowess is another IU's project that is that is very similar to Seminole, but focused on two-year colleges. And I know that some of you, in thinking about kind of your pipeline of secondary mathematics teacher recruitment, are including two-year college partners in this. And so Teaching for Prowess is looking at how we get, two-year college math departments to move away from lecture and be more actively engaging students. And then opportunities for continued engagement. Obviously, there are lots of things with MTEP, which I'll get to in a little bit, but specifically for Seminole. So the Accelerating Systemic Change Network, online communities. So the Commit Network, I think some of your mathematician colleagues and some of you might be part of this already, but there are a number of networks. This is more targeting the smaller institutions of, people who might be the only person teaching courses for teachers in a math department or something like that, or the smaller departments. But these are regional. And so even though a lot of them are still operating on Zoom, some of them are doing in-person things, and they have, different listservs that are associated with them. MAA Connect, if you're a member of the MAA, there's a specific active learning group that has a daily listserv, kind of discussion board. And then AMATIC has a similar thing. The AMATIC communities have kind of these discussion board listserv opportunities to have conversations. At the joint math meetings, January 4th through 7th in 2023, there's going to be a 2-day special session on lessons learned from successful departmental efforts to transform pre-calculus and calculus. A lot of Seminole folks will be presenting. That's January 6th and 7th in the afternoons. I don't have the exact times because they haven't released the exact schedule, but mostly like those afternoons. And then what used to be called mini courses, but are now professional enhancement programs, inclusive active learning in undergraduate mathematics. This one I do know, and this one is also based on Seminole work. It'll be January 5th and 7th, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern time. And that one you do have to sign up for special when you register for the joint math meetings, but it will come out of this research. And we'll do, I'm going to kind of get to the end and then we'll pause and talk again. So MTEP announcements. Hopefully you've all heard by now that the IU's grant is funded, and we are very excited. It's funding both to support the MTEP network, but also to research it, to be able to better understand how is it we can use our networked improvement communities and our network across MTEP to help everybody transform their secondary teacher preparation programs. We have a video announcement that we released in Open Canvas that outlines the activities and structure. And this week, team leaders and designated change agents are going to be getting some follow-up messages, both about responsibilities, but also about the benefits. We have some funding in the grant for this. We have the second annual pre-conference to the 2023 AMTE annual conference. Registration is open now. It's focusing on recruitment and equity. It'll be the day before AMTE in the same hotel. And through this new grant, we have travel funding for teams. It'll be kind of somewhat up to the team leaders to help decide how the funds get utilized, but it's rough. Well, it basically comes out to about $1,000 per campus involved in your NIC. And we would, suggest that you prioritize funding for those who would not otherwise be able to attend. This will be a hybrid conference, so you can attend via Zoom if you're not able to travel to New Orleans. There is not going to be a NICCast in November. We will be having some meetings specifically with people who have different leadership roles in the grant and the ones who have responsibilities for helping us to collect data. We will have a NICCast in December. The date is still to be determined, but it'll focus on recruiting strategies. And then if you haven't already, we encourage you to join our MTEP group on Canvas, because this is where we have announcements and resources, things like recordings of the NICCasts, and all kinds of other things are all there. So now I want to pause and ask if there's any questions you want to ask, anything anyone else wants to add or say. Let me stop sharing my screen so I can see all of you again.
I do want to add that there will be an email coming out with a request for you to complete an evaluation survey for today's NICCast. If you would take the few moments it would require and complete that, it really helps us in future programming, and I thank you for that.
Yep, thanks, John. Yeah, as I'm sure many of you appreciate, especially with having NSF funding, we have to be able to, show that we've evaluated. And so to do that, we need all of you to be willing to complete short surveys of how you experienced our various events.
And they are short.
I would just like to make a comment of it's amazing that this whole Seminole project, the grounds were in MTEP back in about 2012 or 2013, and in 10 years, how much you all have accomplished in really thinking about that broader context for change. Because I think a lot of people are doing the fun activities, but this is the serious work of how do we really make things better? How do we really promote change? So kudos to you all on that work.
Thanks. And, we had some of the same people involved in both Seminole and MTEP. And so, yeah, so it really, I think, kind of fed into each other. But this idea that, just like with MTEP, yes, we have the research action clusters, but just doing one thing, like, yes, you need to do that thing, but to make an actual transformation, you've got to somehow find out how to do all the things, and you prioritize them, you work on different parts of it. But that was really the main lesson, is that, if you're not thinking systemically about it, then it's going to be like the two enthusiastic people who do their thing, and it's not going to spread to anybody else. And then when next semester, when they're not teaching calculus, then it just goes back to whatever it was before. And yeah, it's a lot of work to make the sustainable changes, but we try to argue that it's worth it. All right, well, I'm not seeing anybody else looking like you're about to unmute or anybody typing in the chat. So thank you for engaging. This kind of conversation doesn't work unless people are willing to talk and have conversations about it. So thanks so much for attending today.
Thanks, Wendy, for a really inspiring session, and hope everyone has a great rest of the week. Earlier, a little while ago, I was thinking it was Thursday, but yeah, no. But thank you, Wendy. Yes, very nicely done. See you later.